Okay, we are here today sharing part of our interview with speech therapist Ashley Romero. Ashley is a pediatric speech therapist and owner of Bridging the Pieces Pediatric Therapy Clinic in South Florida. And we're talking through pragmatics. What is pragmatics? What are social skills? Why are they so important for our kids? And then Ashley's taking us through some great examples of how we work on social skills in speech therapy and also how parents can work on these skills at home. If you have not yet checked out our blog post on social skills, we really dive into all the different aspects of social skills and give some great tips and activities to do at home to work on social skills with your kids. So I will link to that below. I definitely recommend checking that out. So let's jump in. We're here again with Ashley Romero, a speech therapist, to talk now about pragmatics. So as parents, we hear that word, I think a lot, or you read it or you hear it, especially if your child's in therapy, about pragmatics. What does that even mean?
Yeah. And you are right. A lot of times, especially when you're parents and you're going through therapy, or even if you're just Googling things, you're going to see a lot of these terms. And it is always okay to ask. You don't have to go, if a therapist comes out and says, oh, today we're working on pragmatics, it's okay to say, hey, can you explain to me what that means? Because trust me, sometimes as therapists, we just get so used to using this terminology that it doesn't even sound like terminology to us anymore. So I think it's really important first to explain that it is okay if you don't know what something is, and we're never going to judge or think differently of you because you asked what something means. If anything, we're actually happier because we're like, oh, they're involved and they want to know what's going on. So yeah, so what is pragmatics? So pragmatics, to put in layman's terms so everyone can understand, is really just working on those social skills, simply understanding what's right and what's wrong. And we've talked about previously about how some kids, it just is an innate thing. They know right from wrong. But a lot of times with the kids that, that we're working with, it's not so innate. And now this can be in autism, but there also are just some pragmatic language deficits where a kid, might have nothing else, but just have some social difficulties. And a lot of times, that's where you might hear, especially if we're talking on the spectrum, we start to go towards that Asperger's. Mm-hmm. And that's where, the kids might not realize, like, hey, you know what, that might not be so socially acceptable, but to them, they really enjoy it. So we have to teach sometimes and reel them in and say, you know what, we have to think about everybody, sometimes our actions, what they mean to other people, what we're talking about, and how we can engage other people. So, and when we're talking about pragmatics, a lot of times, like, again, it's that social skills, but it could be things such as, practicing turn taking, not hurting somebody's feelings. What are feelings? And why do people have them? And what do they feel? Like reading facial expressions. It literally is a huge, 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 field that speech therapists work on. And, our field is so broad, and pragmatics, I think, sometimes gets overlooked, or it's another one of those, parts of our field where parents might look at and say, like, well, why are they working on this? This doesn't seem like therapy. This might be something I can work on at home. And yes, there's tons of things. We would love for you to be working on these things at home. But, there's some things that we see and we're like, okay, we also recognize that, being around other kids or even being with adults, this doesn't necessarily mean, kid to kid. We could even be teaching, like, how do you communicate to a police officer? What's the difference between talking to a child versus talking to an adult? It truly just really means what's right and what's wrong. Also, pragmatic skills could be being able to engage in a conversation. And, as a speech therapist, we really care about that. We want the kids to be able to engage and have those conversational skills. So if a kid goes up to another kid and says, hey, what's your name? And, they don't respond, or, they make up something or just say something way off, that could be socially stigmatizing to a kid. And maybe when they're young, it might not bother them, but as they get older, if they still have some of those deficits, it can bother them and make them kind of, close off. And that's the last thing anybody wants, especially in a social, especially we're so social, in everything that we do. So if the kid starts to feel that, they're going to close off, and then just, could lead to other things that, we just wouldn't want to happen.
I think sometimes parents don't realize how important that is, or realize even because a child may communicate with their parent in a totally different way, you know, at home in your comfort zone, and adult to child. If you don't see your kid around, you don't see your kid at school, you don't see your kid on the playground, you don't see your kid around other kids, you might not even realize that
they have some of these deficits.
These deficits, and parents may just be frustrated, like feeling bad because we feel bad that our kids don't have friends, or it's hard for them to make friends. So this can be a really important reason of why they're struggling so much with.
Right, it's because they have these pragmatic deficits. But the good thing is that there is ways for us to help, and, you know, and ways for us to engage, you know, these kids so they can learn. And, you know, sometimes it's even just about giving different scenarios and saying, hey, like, what would you do in this scenario? And what would you do here? Now, maybe I was at someone's house and I had a glass of milk and I spilled it on the table. You know, oh no, what could you do in that situation? You know, you could say, you know, it was an accident, I'm sorry, can I help clean it up? You know, some things like, you know, that we say, you know, and I feel like we keep touching back on this, that, you know, we don't realize that we have to teach some of these things. And, you know, and the reality is that sometimes we do. And it's okay. And I think you also touched on a really good point about how kids can be totally different, you know, with parents versus school versus therapy. And I know I used to hear that all the time when I worked in a school. And it was like, I'd be like, oh, you know, so-and-so is, you know, doing this and they're doing that. And parents will go, there's no way my kid is doing that. So, you know, with permission, we'd say, you know what, we'll film it for you. And, you know, the next time you come in, we're going to show you. And the parents are always just mind blown because they're like, there's no way, they would never do that at home. And, you know, kids really are different, you know, especially with parents, because, you know, mom and dad are mom and dad. They don't see mom and dad as teacher or therapist or, you know, any other thing besides mom or dad. So their behavior can be totally different.
Yeah, that makes sense. So in speech, so obviously speech therapy is the way to go with this. If you're having concerns about that, you guys definitely help in this area. And is that usually what that would look like, just practicing different scenarios? And
yeah, so it's a lot of conversation, and now where we could do scenarios, but now if I'm working on turn taking, I might give, you know, I could, you know, depending on the age, or if the kid can read, I might give them a visual, and we might have a script, and it might be practicing, and then I might generalize and say, well, you know what, let's try talking about this, and we might take away the script. You know, we're always giving support with the goal that we could start to diminish those supports so the kids are independent and know how to act in these social, you know, scenarios and different situations. So visuals are definitely a big thing that we could do, you know, of course, always talking about it, you know, even for us to set up these different scenarios where, you know, we might, you know, one of my favorite things to do, teaching a kid to say, excuse me. I might stand in front of the door and I'll be like, oh, can you go get mom? And I might be blocking them so they can't get out. And, you know, if they say like, you know, they might push, they might say move, they might not say anything, but that's a learning opportunity. And we can literally set up a learning opportunity for anything and everything. And that's not just parents. What I meant to say is that's not just therapists, it's parents as well. You know, parents can also, you know, set up those scenarios, and it literally can take 2 seconds, you know, while you're cooking dinner, you know, hey, can you get a spoon? But you're standing in front of the drawer and they can't open the drawer because you're standing there, you know, it could be a way for them to do that. You know, talking on a phone, there's so many things that go into pragmatics, you know, that anything can be practiced and worked on. If, you know, it's important for some kids to maybe call grandma and grandpa. We might work in a session about teaching them how to maybe even dial a phone number, recalling a phone number, where to hold the phone. You know, every small step means something and brings us to our, you know, overall goal. But another thing, you know, speech therapists might do is they might have social groups. So they might have small groups where they bring in multiple children and, you know, they set up those social scenarios and teach them to work with kids, because at home there might not be other kids, they might be an only sibling. So it's nice when they're getting those social scenarios with other kids, you know, as well as adults. So there's definitely multiple ways of working on this.
Definitely, I love it. I think we forget how many things come naturally to us that we never really had to learn, and we have to think back and realize that we may have to teach our kids those things that you don't even think about because it comes naturally to us.
Mm-hmm. And it's okay. You know, I think sometimes parents get upset, you know, about that. But once you see them start to learn and use those things, you know, you totally forget about how, you know, it bothered you at one point because it means so much and it's so gratifying to everybody and, you know, that's been involved with it.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. I think that's super helpful for our parents. We'll post the link below for our full blog post on social skills. And don't forget to check out our parent training, Do It Yourself Language at Home, where we go through how to decrease behaviors and improve language at home, an online training for parents. Subscribe now so you don't miss any of our upcoming videos.